Tá gravando.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So let's welcome, big welcome to Agostino de Scipio. Thanks so much being with us directly from Aquila. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly. I hope so.
It's perfect.
That's correct. And we're really happy it's a group of many groups. Musitec is a sort of multiple research group with many people from many different parts of Brazil, cities, universities, institutions interested in studying music and technology, and in a very performance and creation directions. So we are very, very, very happy to have you with us, Agostino. I had the pleasure to record one of your pieces, Mode of Interference number 2. We had the occasion to meet many times, and last time it was in 2019 in Zurich.
Yes.
And when we met, when we were also doing a masterclass on how to perform your piece and reflecting also on, about all the issues.
By the way,
and
you know that they have published your notations on that in their website. There is a website with the proceedings of the seminars they have, and there's a lot of data collected concerning the pieces targeted.
I haven't seen that yet. I will.
And so there's also a few references to your paper or your I don't know, your suggestions. I don't remember exactly now, but
okay. Yeah. This was it was a very interesting meeting. Also, many other pieces. Also, they were preparing. They were interesting project because they invited the performers and the composers in order to put information forward about these pieces and the reflections. They invited musicologists also to. So Agostino, please be welcome in name of Musitec Research Group. We are really glad with your presence, and please let's start with all the subjects. You said you're going to do more in the theoretical directions, as we suggested, related to your thesis, to your PhD thesis in Paris 8 University that you defended last year. So Agostino.
Thank you so much, Pedro, and nice to meet you, everybody. I'm very glad to be talking to you and to sharing some ideas with you. Following the many meetings with Pedro on the sharing of concerts and performance situations and conferences also, I think in Paris and Berlin. I think it was the first time we met was in Berlin in 2008, I guess. Yes. Now, when Pedro invited me for this talk to talk to you, we didn't know exactly how to arrange what subjects to address. But then a few weeks ago, he came up with a list of topics that he picked up from, that he himself had picked up from my PhD dissertation. And the list of topics is this one that I'm going to share on the screen. Some of the words, the topics that Pedro picked up, they are written in French because he was taking them from the PhD text that was presented in Paris. But well, by the way, the PhD thesis he was referring to, of course, I'm not a young guy at all, so I think the PhD was more for me a way to gather and to gather a number of experiences and reflections that I went through the years. and fix some ideas, some establish some ideas and fix some reflections that were based largely on practice, performing, and composition. So these are the four topics he was proposing, and I accepted. Very glad to accept those four. They are not the main focus of my thesis, but let's say the first issue here is targeted, especially in the first part, in the introductory part, and then the other three, all of them are targeted in the third and last part of the thesis, which is actually titled Critique du son, or Crise du son, Crisis of Sound, and Critique of Sound. And those are those three parts, those two parts, the beginning part and the last part of the thesis are the more theoretically oriented. By necessity, and also because we are in this strange situation in presenting, I cannot be, and I don't want to be very formal in this presentation. I will just, approach and explain those four topics in very general terms, and then if there are questions, and we can discuss about them to allow me to be more precise, to go a little bit more in the details. So nothing very formal as a presentation, and not even related to practical issues, of which some of you maybe are very interested in, like Adriano Montero, and surely also Pedro and other guys. But in this situation, I cannot provide many details with with this kind of virtual meeting that we have. So can you hear me well? Everybody is receiving well, and also also the
Yeah,
screen.
really, really well.
Okay. Recherche création, or in English, it is more customary to say artistic research, which, generally speaking, can be viewed as action-based research, in the word of scientific, in this word of science and academy. Action-based research meaning a research which is based on acting upon the subjects and researching the issue, for example, in the fields rather than in the laboratory. But more precisely, it has to do with what is being called practice-led research. That is research based on practicing some medium of expression, some medium of communication, some medium of craftsmanship, some medium of literate studies, whatever requires of the researcher to be very well aware of the experience of the subject. It requires that the researcher is also, in a way, a practitioner, not just someone detached from the field researched, but a practitioner of that field himself or herself. So, and in the particular case of our interest here and in our shared interests in general, this is more like artistic practice led research. So it's a kind of research that you do by practicing art making. And this is something very odd for the academy, or at least as far as I can see and I could see in these years, because normally researchers are scientifically oriented and minded, and artists are presumed not to be, or at least not necessarily to be scientifically or rationally minded. So there is a kind of problem, a fundamental problem here concerning what is art about and what is research or science about. I will not go so far as to discuss these large topics, but it is true it is true that this kind of situation, which is I would say relatively new, at least I have seen it. I've seen it growing in Europe in the last 10 years, 15 years, and in the whole world, in several spots in the world. Um, it requires that the artist is seen as someone whose effort, whose labor, whose work is of interest behind himself or herself, behind aesthetics and behind aesthetical values. And also, it implies that researchers are not detached from the subject researched and are involved in research that in the subject they research. So so this is a kind of it implies self-observation, self-observation and self-criticism. Oops, sorry. It requires um, a loop of theory and practice. And praxis, let's say, let's write praxis, which is more general than practice. It means that there's no theory without a practical knowledge necessary to develop, to sustain, to support a theory, and there's no praxis, there's no practical engagement that doesn't need some theoretical view of the field, some general understanding of the field. And so it is exactly there in the link between these two, in the double link pointing both to theory and practice. It's not just that from theory you come to praxis or from praxis to theory, but they cross feed, cross correlate, and feed one another. Now this is after all not so much essentially if we see it in a more open-minded epistemological view, in a more open-minded approach to knowledge, to human knowledge and cognitive processes, this is not so strange of artists, because art making always imply a very strict loop between perception and action. Artists are people who can act as they perceive the world. They act upon the world as they perceive it, and they perceive the world because they act upon the world. It's not possible to perceive anything if you don't act on the thing. It's not possible to act upon the thing if you don't perceive it, of course. So so this simple shift from detached research to a self-observing practice of artistic artistic practice-led research, as a lot to do, I think, with this perception to action loop, perception and action loop, which is actually, according to many in the field of cybernetic and cognitive studies, essential to cognition, to all cognitive activities. Cognition being the process by which we come to know, to sense, and to know the world, or at least the environment or the niche of the environment around us. So my point on this would be that it's no surprise that in such a complicated and also complex world in which we live, also music making, of course, uh, is situated more and more often in a very complicated, very technologically oriented and structured environments. And so it's little surprise that we have to make sense of the environment in which we make music in order for the music to be made, in order for us to make the music. To make music in this sense is an act of knowing the niche around us, the environment around us. So in this sense, I would say all music implies that, but historically speaking, the coming to awareness of this notion is what characterizes was it is what connotates artistic practice-led research, or music practice-led research, musical practice-led research versus making music, or versus musicology in the more traditional sense. So there's this self-observing perception and action loop, which is essential to cognition, and that justifies also the historical emergence of this paradigm of practice-led research, and its shift and its relevance for artistic practice. So, and of course, this kind of self-critical or self-observational praxis today, because of the complexity, of the sheer complexity and the sheer technologization of the world we live in, today becomes always more and more interdisciplinary. Um, this is very well known. It has been interdisciplinary studies are the focus of a lot of research, scientific and in the humanities too, since I would say after the Second World War. But one wonder if interdisciplinarity is really correct, because interdisciplinarity means that different disciplines interact and still remain different. They do their things. They exchange results or processes, paradigms, methods, but essentially they remain the same. So at some point, transdisciplinary was preferred to interdisciplinary as a general umbrella word for describing the meeting or the clash of different views and disciplinary views on artistic practice-led research, and yet, of course, interdisciplinary in this case is already something different, and let's say a little bit more sophisticated, more elaborate than multidisciplinary. Multidisciplinary work is the collaboration, or maybe just the necessity to link between different disciplinary words, disciplinary perspective, not necessarily interacting, just that they share the results. Interdisciplinary means they interact before sharing the results. Transdisciplinary means essentially that the disciplines, by way of interacting, change themselves. So in, I must say, as a music composer or as a sound artist, I hardly occupy myself with just sound or music, except that I have personally, but this is very general, as you all know here, be somehow an expert or sort of expert in digital signal processing or information theory or psychology or gestalt form or I don't know what else. In these days, I'm teaching a class in statistical processes and stochastic processes. So I'm not a statistician. I'm not any expert in statistics, but I do have to develop a very close awareness of statistical paradigms in order to teach that class. So this is to say that I, as a musician, we as musicians are changing, have been changing, have changed anyway, by way of having different disciplines, different competences, and fields of interest clash together and interact. So I think this has to do more exactly with the practice-led research in general, and with the way of the way cognition is working in cognitive animals, in cognitive creatures as we are. Um, I would also add a last item here, which is because essentially none of us, not me at least, I occupy myself, I'm deeply into so many things. Someone knows me as a musicologist or music theorist, or as a composer, or as a teacher, or as a at some point I was introduced to an audience as a mathematician, which I'm not at all. But this is to say that perhaps we come up with not having really any specific kind of discipline to profile, to define. In a way, this situation brings us to a certain indiscipline. And I say that, of course, also with some irony, but not so much. I mean, with irony, but up to some point. To be indisciplinated has to do or could be the case if you go into inter or transdisciplinary work. And if you don't become an expert in all of the fields, which is rarely the case, or in all the fields that are connected to your work, then this has more to do with indiscipline than with trans or interdiscipline. But it is okay because artists can add there a notion of imagination or fantasy or whatever, a vision, which is not necessarily connected to disciplinary fields in a way. So indiscipline is not negative just because of the normal use of the word. Why I am focusing on this first item, not just because was I think Pedro placed it very, not maybe he didn't mind too much, but he was very careful, implicitly he was very careful in putting this notion here as the first of the four topics you see here on the screen, because essentially this has to do with a transformation of our working paradigm and also mental paradigm. The question is more, for me, is more a question of an epistemological question, meaning how we happen to know things we are concerned with, um, but in a way that implies a shift from making music or learning about how music should be or is normally made to another view, which can be expressed by asking what you learn about music by making music, what you learn about music and what you learn about the world by your music making. It means that music in this kind of attitude is not an end in itself. It it you make it in order you try to make you make an effort to make music in order to better understand music and to better understand the world around you, the environment or the world at large. It is in this sense that I would say that not only music is a way of knowing, but it also implies the possibility to know the music. There's little to do to learn to make music except making it, trying to make it. It's the best way to make it, and that brings us back to the theory, praxis, or perception action loop that we were mentioning before. Um, um, so this has to do with a kind of epistemology of music, how music is developed in music making that can tell us something about music in the first place, in general, and of concerning the world in the second place, but not second. It's quite important. Why we should call it experimental? Well, this is more personal, I would say. We Epistemology is normally a branch of philosophy which is concerned with which is focused on the on methods of knowledge, how people come to know something, and how science is structured, what are the patterns, the paradigms of scientific search. Experimental epistem. So basically, it is a theoretical, a kind of philosophical, theoretical discipline. Experimental epistemology is a definition, not my own, of course. It's a definition born with the cyberneticians, the cybernetics of the 50s and 60s, like McCulloch and von Forster, and more recently Francisco Varela in Chile, and Umberto Maturana in Chile too. Cyberneticians that realized that in order to know how we know, we should make a machine, make an experiment doing something that can know something around itself, modeling somehow the way that men and women are able to know the world. And so in this case, to know about music and about making music. Um, So for me, thinking of composition as a kind of experimental epistemology of music means that the only way for me to really know about music was, first of all, trying to make it, and in the course of making it, thinking and focusing and analyzing the patterns emerging in the making of music. So you need to do experiments or to live, to go on, to just stay with experiments for the whole life, independent of whether it is aesthetically relevant or not. I mean, they are, of course, to be aesthetically relevant if you are in the music field as a professional, as a practitioner of music, but and most of the musicians are just are satisfied with making good music. But we are stressing here the possibility that music can tell us something about itself and about the world. And the only way that it says something about itself and the world is for us to make it and to be responsible for making it and to be responsible for the experiments that we need, the experiences, the activities that we need to make music. So maybe I could be more specific as if any question arises, but I will leave it here for the time being, and shift and step ahead to the next to the let's say to the next topic. In fact, the two topics following, and this is why I say that Pedro was particularly lucky or smart. Of course, he was smart to put this list there. Is that for me, irreducible listening or écoute irréductible, and this question of the irreproducibility, the non-reproducibility of sound, etc., which I will focus on quickly, are some of the things I learned by making music. Sorry, epistemology. Sorry, there was a mistake here. So the question about this question of research and epistemology of music for me was a way to learn something. And what I learned, among the things I learned, or I sort of learned or seem to have learned, are these two following here. What I learned, that listening as an activity, as a cognitive activity, as an activity of a cognitive system like animals and human beings, cannot be reduced to in terms of physical or formal term schema or models. The implication here, of course, has also to do with Pierre Schaeffer's écoute réduite, reduced listening. For Schaeffer, reduced listening was an attitude new at this time, rather new, not entirely new, but rather new at these times in the 50s or in 60s, an attitude of listening by which we focus on the morphology of sound, and in the end on sound in itself. In fact, no surprise that he ended up speaking of the sound object, which is not, which is a psychological construct. It's a cognitive construct, a cognitive construction, but still it's an objectification or reification eventually. The sound object is not a signal. It's not as much reified as a signal, but it's still something that is out of you, it's out there. It's the form of the sound. It's the morphology, the inner life, the internal life of the sound in itself. In itself, Schaeffer meant by in itself without any reference to the sound source, without any reference to the environment where the sound is born, without any reference to the time to the occasion, to the kairos, to the moment in which time a sound was originated. So just sound as the shape of the spectral energies, the way the envelope, or whatever you may use technical terms or looser terms or whatever, but whatever description of the sound in physical or psychological terms that could be intersubjectively shared and valid, cut by any situation, by any positioning of sound in the world, in the real world. Um, so again, the sound disconnected from the environment, disconnected from the source, disconnected from semantics, and disconnected from the time it happened before being objectified and thus recorded. Um, Now, this is of course very, very relevant and historically fundamental to almost all electronic music, electroacoustic music, and I would say to even a much larger breadth, wealth of musical productions, even in everyday commercial music, whatever pop music, whatever, reduced listening, the ability of producers, musicians, and listeners to understand sound as a thing in itself without a reference to the source or the context to which it belonged initially before reaching our ear. Is quite normal. It's a seconda natura. It's a second nature for us. It's normal for most music in the modernity, in late modernity. Sound can be an object, and listening is an effort to reduce sound to an object, to cut, to put in brackets, as Schaeffer said, the semantics, the belonging to a time, the belonging to a place, the belonging to a larger discourse, a semantical discourse, an expression of human beings or animals or whatever. Um, Now, what I mean by irreducible listening, as a result of analyzing many composers' music, many sound artists' work, and by making music myself, first of all, and making sound art myself, sound installations, is that listening can hardly be reduced to sound in itself. This is something Schaeffer knew very well. He was the very first to criticize himself upon concerning reduced listening, and he said it's reduced listening is necessary, is the path to new way of thinking about music, new ways of composing and listening to music, etc. Uh, it is necessary for new music for the renovation of musical language, etc. But he said also that it is an impossible task. It is something that really um, cannot really take place fully, cannot be really completed. The effort of reducing, of cutting off everything from sound and to listen only to the morphology, to the spectral morphology, the physical properties of the psychoacoustical properties only, without connections to the real world, is an impossible task for human beings. Um, why is that? Well, nowadays we would say that the ear is always, is by definition, is a sense organ of an animal that lives in an environment in which, of course, every single sound event is significant of something happening in the environment. So it could be crucial as an information to life, to survival, to communicating with other people and with things around us. Um, so it is just normal for the human, for all kinds of human listening, not to be able to abstract from everything and reduce the focus of attention to the sound object itself, to the sound morphology alone. So there's an ecological kind of critique to this. To this idea of reduced listening. There is also a relational, I would say, a relational and a political critique that is also possible. Let's say that first of all, sound brings the traces, brings us, no, well, I will reformulate, sorry. Sound is the trace of an event in the environment. All sounds are coming from some source moving in the environment. So they are, first of all, informant of events happening. Now, the question is that the shapes of sound, the morphologies, the timbre, is, although very complex as a psychoacoustical construct, is a very sensible, is a very clear trace of the complexity of the movement and the events happening. Meaning, the more complex, the more elaborated, the more inharmonic or aperiodical or complicated is the spectrum or the timbre of an event of sound, and the more is likely to be complicated or complex or irreducible, the movement, the action that causes sound, the body, the vibrations that cause the sound to be heard, to arrive to our ears. So the trace is not just that something happened. That's the first thing. The second thing is something that is more or less a trace of how much energy is being put in order for this for some action to be exerted. So the richness, the spectral richness means there was a lot of effort, a lot of force, a lot of labor spent into sound to make some action whose sound can become audible to our ears. So there's a second level of information that is brought about by sound, which is how much strong, how big, how energetic is the source, and how complicated is the control of that source by someone who is eventually handling this source of sound. Now, this is also a kind of, let's say, relational, meaning in terms of still ecological, but also it's a kind of relational critique, meaning that sound tells me of the actions exerted by someone else or by some things around us. So by cutting sound, we are cutting a relation. If sound is informative of an action being exerted, then my relation to this source, to this action, to this guy or thing that is exerting, spending energy to make an action and that is eventually audible, it cuts the relation to it get cuts it get cut it get disconnected if I focus on sound in itself. So by taking care of sound as a trace of event happening, I would say we also understand the action that is exerted, and also all of the mediations that are in place that bring us sound. This is to say that there's also a question of technology here, mediations being the very essence of technological systems of any source. Technology is about allowing to use mediations, to process that mediates between an input and output, between a target and a source of information, and a target to accomplish, etc., etc. So if I don't, if I only concentrate on sound in itself, I lose I lose also the relation to all of the mediators that are affecting sound. No sound is rid, is empty of the traces left by the environment in which it comes to our ears. No sound is without the traces of the media, of the transducers, of the speakers, the microphones, the mixers, the whatever, the converters, the encoders, or whatever. No sound is without the traces of all these mediations. So by focusing on sound itself, I would cut off the world of mediations that are testified, that are witnessed in the sound shape, in the audible experience, in the auditory experience. Sorry. So this is why I see a problem here with the, this is, I think these three domain of criticism are possible, let's say, of which the third is maybe a bit odd to hear about, because we tend to think of technology as neutral, as not affecting the things, the processes uh, for which we use it. These three domains of possible criticism, um, I would say, are enough as to raise some doubts upon reduced listening, and upon the notions of sound in itself or sound objects, and also, let's say, more in general, without yeah, I don't want to be nasty with Schaffer, of course, but with me it is meaningless. But let's say that all experiences that force us to objectify and reify sound are, for me, um, possible targets of criticism. Um, this is why, of course, you can do wonderful acousmatic music. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we have, because we can do reduced listening, because we can objectify sound, because we can hear sound in itself. We should be aware that sound is not in itself, is not an object, and that listening cannot be reduced to the morphology of sound. So I'm not saying we should go back to before technology, of course. I'm saying we should profit from a new historical basis of domain of experience, which is opened up by older and newer audio technologies, but with an understanding that they are not neutral, with an understanding that they can, of course, rework, modify, alter, reinvent the relational and the ecological dimensions of the sonic, of the auditory experience. So what, in the end, what I would say, um, what I would um, uh, what could be, what I would accept an indication as a rich, useful indication out of this criticism, of these possible sources of criticism, is that by detaching, by disconnecting sound from the word, we are also disconnecting the music, because then the shift from objectifying the sound to objectifying the music in itself is very small, especially in a music like, for most of us, music is sound, or sound is already musically relevant. So there's a kind of confusion, a profitable, a wonderful, a fertile confusion between sound and music, and the whole passage, historical passage from shift from music to sound art, is also an issue that has to do with that. But anyway, what I'm saying is that by disconnecting sound from the situation, from the place, the time, the context, the environment, and the mediators, the technological and mechanical and electronic and digital and analog and all sorts of mediators that change, however subtly, the sound that arrives to our ear, we are also risking to disconnect the music or the experience of the music from the from the from the from the place, from the time, from the context. And this is something very odd, and I tend not to accept it, because music, historically speaking, music is a way for human beings to know the environment, to exchange energy with the environment, to music changes upon different environment. Music always, I mean, if you play an instrument, you will always play different depending on what room you are in, depending on what time it is you are in, depending on how many people you are in, etc., etc., etc. However subtly, however swiftly, but it changes, and those changes are crucial to musical knowledge. Those changes are the domain of musical knowledge. Small changes, but incredibly huge knowledge in those few details. So this is why it also becomes political, because if you disconnect music from the social relationships which are behind the technology, then you are detaching music from relation of powers, with which music cannot, I mean, with which music has always to do something. Music is always in the society. It has always to do with the social processes and relations of power. And in our case, let's say the digital technology, or even telematic technology like this, or analog, whatever technology, mechanical technology even, all those technologies are based upon certain kind of competences and like expertise, and also on relation of powers. Especially today, especially if we are talking about telematic, digital, etc., it has to do with a lot with relation of power. So, by way of cutting off sound from the context, by going to reduce listening from the context, I fear we lose contact, we detach, we disconnect, and lose contact from the context we are in and we work with. While on the contrary, we as musicians, we have a kind of special sensibility for time modifications, for time variations, for space variations, whatever, which is crucial to not only just to ecological kind of perspectives, but to human beings, to what? To perception and action, to freedom in action, which is freedom in perception. In order to be free and responsible for your action, you have to be free and responsible and allowed to have to perceive the world somehow. So all mediators changing perception, of course, are relevant to this discourse. So what I learned, this is not just like a theoretical learning. It was something that I discovered because I saw kind of patterns emerging out of my experience with composing and sound making, sound art making. I saw emerging potential meanings from the fact that at some point I abandoned all acousmatics and only focused on live performance, and also with live dependent on musical gesture, on instrumental gesture, and then live processes depending on environmental resonances, and then live processes depending on man, machine to environment, to a kind of triangularity of relationship, to a network of man, machine, and environment. So I realized that I was sort of changing the way we should think about listening. So what I learned with my making music, with my little epistemology of music, experimental epistemology of music, was one of the lessons I learned was that, yeah, that listening cannot be reduced, and rather it is always involved. It is always ecological, relational for sure. And yeah, the French word is a little bit better. It's écoute impliquée, which is difficult to translate. It's not implicated listening. It's like committed listening, but committed in English, it's too much like a political manifesto. So it's
How
more
is in Italian, Agostino? Maybe in Italian it's close to Portuguese.
ascolto. Yeah, it's the same difficulty as in the English.
Ah, okay, so I'm sorry. I was trying to help.
No, I would say just riducibile versus irriducibile, ridotto versus irriducibile, not reducible, irreducible. Impliqué is more like ecologically involved,
Yeah.
aware, with the aware,
Concerned, maybe.
yeah, but
Concerned, worried, or
concerned with the fact that you are part of the sound system. You're not because impliqué is also spatially. It has also a spatial kind of meaning. You are in the thing. You are au milieu du phénomène. Donc, il y a un petit décalage de signification between the impossibility to cut from the context and the fact that you are part of the context. Let's say that maybe it could be summarized also in a different way. What is reducible or not reducible is also the listener, not only the sound or not only the listening. It's like reduced listener versus active or involved or committed or concerned listener.
Agostino, wouldn't it have to do with the pattern of the body and our gestures and our embodied? There's this term embodied sound also. It hasn't something to do with it.
Embodied, but not only like in the cognitive sciences, but also embodied, meaning that you are part of the environmental body, meaning both the mechanical environment and the technology as a domain of mediations. Yeah, embodied could also be nice. So the second thing among those that I sort of learned by making music, I think this has more to do with the more recent sound art works. By analyzing and also by listening, by informing myself, by studying, observing other people's work, I realized that much of the most significant sound art, and especially sound installations, cannot be reproduced, cannot be recorded, they can be documented, but the documentation is hardly close to the real experience of the situation. It's hardly close to the situation, the time specific, the site specific, and the context specific situation where you listen to some work, to some music and to some sound work. So, of course, we have been, for a century now, we have been faking that music could be reproduced without losing anything. Let's say that a pitch-based music could be recorded and preserve, let's say, 60%, 70% of the information by which you would perceive, would experience the form, the shape, the structure, some relevant information that makes the identity that makes the identity of some piece of music that that denotates some music, some piece of music. But when sound becomes the essence, when sound in time and in space becomes the essence of a new language, like yeah, in the passage from like electroacoustic music to sound art, for example, then sound cannot be. I mean, multi-track recording, multi-track recording that just doesn't improve, doesn't help. It's not just a question of how many ears you try to simulate in the recording, or how many sources you try to simulate. It's just that it doesn't situate the listener. Uh, so maybe this is a bit radical, as it's more like a provocation, let's say, in music theoretical terms. But I do think that if we just stick to the language of the mainstream media, if we stick to the sociology of media, to the mediology, the mainstream discourse about media, media are always understood as fixed media, in a way, as reproducing technologies. While it is very relevant to me, very significant, and very also surprising, maybe, that with nowadays technologies we can do music that cannot be recorded. With nowadays technologies, we can do music that cannot be technically or mechanically, as Benjamin said, being recorded. So maybe we should think, of course, it's more like my provocation to the mainstream media discourse. But it's also true that in the media theory nowadays, I read a lot of media theory work and literature, and I don't find any reference to live sound installations, to the liveness of music and sound installations. It's always like media are fixed media, and however real time in itself is not enough to say lie. Real time is just real time. It's not space. It's not real space. I mean, in order to have live, you need the real time, real space, real context around you. You have to be there, and this to be there, this Dasein in Heideggerian terms, in phenomenological terms, cannot be reproduced. Not even in the 20% or maybe the 30%. So this is just a provocation to say that maybe we should think of how we came to produce something that is much beyond the paradigm, the paradigm put forth in 1937. So 85 years ago by Walter Benjamin.
A little bit of Heraclitus. You don't step 2 times in the same.
A little stronger, sorry, I didn't get it.
Sorry, my microphone is down.
No, it's good.
Maybe it's related to Heraclitus. Everything
Okay.
flows, and you don't step 2 times in the same
River.
experience.
In the same sound experience, yes.
Yes.
yes. Yeah.
But how do you envisage this in this pandemic situation? How do you think about this within our reality? Because we are in this reality, and
the pandemic doesn't change so much. I mean, it does change by the sheer amount of hours we spend in front of computers. But I've been in front of a computer since 1982, so it doesn't change too much so much for me, to say the truth. But it changes because it allows us to think. I think this is a nice question because it allows us to think a little bit better. This question of liveness, because nowadays we hear a lot of people, politicians and TVs and etc., a lot of discourse about live streaming, live set or live streaming is actually a recorded. Normally, it's a fixed media transfer of information. Although it was recorded without montage, without mixing. But anyway, yeah, this is it multiplies. The pandemics has multiplied the occasions for us to think what is really live in communication, in all communications, and not only in music. And of course, between fully fixed media to fully live, there are so many, different levels, so different grades, different, different possibilities. So, but yeah, I think personally, I think that nowadays we need we need that, a discourse on live media that can be understood by a large number of people, because the larger number of people than before are experiencing the liveness and not so liveness and not so liveness of communication through telematic or whatever other media. So I would say, maybe to be positive, it's a irrepeatable, or maybe it will be repeated, unfortunately, but irrepeatable occasion for us to think of what is live communication. All right. This is this that we are talking. I mean, I am talking this moment. I am not sharing the same space with my audience, but actually none of you in the audience are sharing the same space as me and as you, part of the audience. We are sharing the time, but not even the time in the day. We are sharing. You are going to eat in a short turn of time, and I ate 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours ago. I am almost like in the darkness because I'm in the mountains and it's 6 o'clock, and you are in the full light, in full sunlight. So even time. I mean, we are sharing the duration of the communication. We are not sharing the time in the day, the social time. So there are so many nuances to be highlighted thanks to this strange pandemic situation that may be useful to better ponder what is liveness. This is the most positive I can be about this situation.
So we are not fully situated. We are just sharing the duration.
Yeah, some things are shared. I would say duration, some things are not. Yes, yeah. Also, when we meet in a conference or in a class or whatever, we don't see the faces, just the faces. We see much more than the faces. We have the nose is working also, and also your microphones are now off, and normally I wouldn't be able to cut off Tatiana's voice, for example. So it's really something that is so nuanced that may be worth of some thinking about it. Yes, in terms of what degrees of liveness. Yeah, let's say living systems, not so living system, almost dead systems in a larger scale of possibilities. So essentially, the last topic here, and so I'm going to conclude my talk. Is just this is again quite personal, but yeah, it's one of those things that by making music, I sort of learned to understand. I sort of understood it is largely shared, actually, not just so personal, but yeah, it was born like a personal thing, and then I realized that it is shared, and it can be said of many different approaches, that we are not making. I mean, I wonder if we are, if I am, let's say, let me be shy. I'm not so sure if I am doing a music of sound anymore. If sound is the thing in my music, of course, it is. It has been, and it is, because it has been. It cannot be still and again. But I wonder that if you change the approach to listening, and if you don't want to accommodate to the diktat of the objectification of sound, especially in terms of I don't know, sound files to be exchanged without any change in the sound in itself, which is again not the real thing, the real experience, but a fake. Um, then I would say I'm more concerned with the conditions for sound to happen rather than with sound in itself, but rather with the sound phenomenon. I don't look for a sound or a certain kind of sound. I first of all, I am first of all concerned with what are the acceptable conditions, be them ecological, relational, technological, for me to make some sound, and then see what sounds can be made by accepting uh, uh, the responsibility for those conditions. So this crisis of sound means, are we sure we should still emphasize that this music is a music of sound? Wouldn't it be better if we concern ourselves more with the responsibilities over the making of sound, of the conditions for making sound possible, for making sound to happen in a time, in a space? Um, so all of the sound studies, for example, some in the humanities, in the recent humanities, sound studies as a new disciplinary field, um, can bring us, can give us, historical, technological, historical, scientific, sociological, historical, cultural, historic accounts of sound making, of sound sharing, of of sonic communications in general. So it allows us to develop a criticism of how sound are not so much heard or perceived, because as we have a lot of psychoacoustics, which is quite fantastic, but how sound is conceived as a basis for music, as the basis for music. And I'm playing here with the word crisis and critique, because both come from the same Greek root, which is kreo, kri, which is on the basis of knowledge. An English word basis on that would be discernment, discernimento, or discriminazione. Cri, or here it became cr, has to do with this crisis, which is actually a critique. Crisis is when knowledge can happen, and critique is the, let's say the establishment of a regimen, a domain of crisis, or at least of a phenomenon to be put into crisis in order to know them, to better know about them. So it's a little part of work, hidden kind of part of work, between criticism and crisis, that expressed, in my personal opinion, this notion that maybe more than with sound in itself, we should be concerned with the conditions for sound to be born, travel through space and time, and reach the ear. Also in the awareness that it is not any particular sound unless it reaches some human ears, because the ears themselves, the listener itself, himself or herself, changes the sound he listens to. It changes both physiologically, and it's also, of course, it changes mentally, cognitively. So it's a way to collapse the question of irreducible listening and the irreproducibility of sound that I was discussing earlier on, by pointing to a wealth of knowledge and of research that has been done currently in the sound studies, and in some form of sound arts, of let's say conceptual sound art too. I mean, if we are able to experience sound as something that brings us traces, practical traces, significant traces of who is around me, what is around me, what environment, what context, what time, what space, what mediators, in other words, what technologies, what techniques, then these are conditions for sound to happen more than, like something that delivers sound. They are conditions for sound to be experienced more than physical causes that make sound possible and physically present to the ear. So maybe this is not so straightforward, but yeah. Maybe I should just say that Pedro put it here, and I don't know what were his expectations of me to clarify this, but yeah, it has to do with the sound and music as knowledge, as knowledge processes and cognitive media.
No, but these considerations you just have done are really very large for reflections and for questions. So I don't know if you want to continue a little more, or if we can go to the questions to exchanging with you.
I will go for the questions. Yes.
Okay. So, who would like to start?
Tatiana?
There was this consideration that Rodolfo put in the chat that I really find it very interesting, and that's true. He said, I don't know if he's there yet. Rodolfo, are you there?
I will go see the chat. I didn't see it. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, but we can read it.
Yeah, he's not saying anything,
Well,
so I'm going to. Do you want to say it, Rodolfo? Or do I say it?
I can read for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
About liveness, even our biological non-mediated experience is not live. Perception is always 50 milliseconds late. So
Right. Yes. Okay.
there's a chain of mediations, body, space, and maybe he was proposing the discussion also for our inner experience. And
well, this is an observation. Of course, it is an observation that doesn't change the discussion so much. But to take it seriously, it is possible to develop a kind of another argument. I mean, the continuity, the link of continuity between nature and culture, where nature stops and where culture comes in. So, of course, all mediators. I mean, the body is a mediator. The ear, the ear, every couple of years, every single year, changes the sound that the owner of the body finally hears. The sides of the head, whatever changes the sound in itself. So whatever changes, whatever is a mediator of sound. This is why it is still very relevant physiologically. This notion that sound is anything that is beyond relations, is nothing. Sorry, I said wrongly. Is nothing that is beyond relations. Is nothing that is beyond mediations. Sound is a medium where you can perceive means and ends relation, how means comply to ends and how ends were reformulated by the means that you can handle. So it's a process, and so nowhere in the process it is something in itself. So and this observation by Rodolfo Valente, I think, just testify to this, enlarges actually the question of this continuity between, there is nothing like an ideal sound. There's nothing like a real thing, and the real thing is what is real is the process along which every single spot is a different kind of experience, is a different kind of sound.
And sound leaves traces, but we cannot reproduce it in the ecological paradigm that you explained to us. So there's a...
Yeah.
Okay. Who else? Yeah.
No, I'm. There's no one there that points the finger. So I'm going to just to say that the beginning of your talk about the research-led action research and practice-led research, I think that here in Brazil, it's something that we are very, very used to do, in fact. So I don't know if we have a lot of issues about it, because the structure of the practice of composition is all maintained by the university, and since I don't know when we begin to have composition in the doctor degree, or here I was already in France at the moment, I guess. It was after 2005, I guess. But our PhD and master degree was always in musicology. So we were forced to be musicologists and composers.
Yes, I think that has to do with the recent history of Brazil, because the dictatorship ended in '85, I guess, right? And so there was the strong split between humanities and scientific research was not so. I mean, it was there. What was very strong, but it has been it was not questioned by anybody except when you were relieved of the dictatorship. So in 10 years or so, you made a jump which maybe Europe has done in like 50 years in this sense. So you didn't have many, because it came with such an important split in history. It was maybe easier for you to integrate music making as a form of research than it was in Europe. But if we don't just focus on like computer music or musical informatics or musicology, of course, as a research issue, as a research topic, because I mean there is research in the humanities, of course. But if you don't focus on single specific areas of concern, you will not find it, you cannot see in Europe this great mix of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary work as it happened in the States and in South America too, or at least in Brazil, as you said. So maybe it has to do with in your case, in the case of Brazil, maybe it has to do with this kind of strong shift, strong change that is so recent. Much more recent than ours, unfortunately. So
Okay, Silvio, you wanna ask your question? You put on the chat.
Oh, you can read it. No, it's
So we
very.
can think that sound is a surface where human manifests some kind of relations we call music. Yes, music is some kind of relations. And the domain to express those relation is not maybe a surface. It's more like a three-dimensional kind of interface. Yeah, yeah. In fact, sometimes I use this phrase. This sound is the interface. Meaning that sound is the interface, meaning that I wouldn't, for example, in a live performance context, I wouldn't change the computer setup by pressing buttons, but I would let it change upon um, the occasioning of some sounds. So I would teach the computer to trace properties of sound in order for it to change, rather than changing interactively, so to say, the parameters in play by some buttons, some faders, or whatever. Sound is the interface. Yeah. Music is a field of relations, and sound is the space or interface or surface, whatever, to make it possible.
So a kind of a kind multifaced.
Yes, beauty face. That's not only an interface or a surface, but
Yeah,
a multi or a trans face,
also in phase.
or yes, an implicated face.
Yeah, I'm scrolling the chat.
Maybe I have a question also. You listen to me?
Yes.
Yeah, you talked about this. I liked it very much. This idea of reification of sound, and also this critique, both to a conception of an assumed reducible listening, and of neutral technology in two parts of your presentation.
Yeah.
Do you see some kind of relationship between these two ways to conceptualize both sound and technology in I would say, in a zeitgeist, and in some kind of way to conceive the world after the war, or after the yeah, I mean,
Late modernity and
this
postmodernity.
neutralization of things, and this way of this attempt to grasp them without the social, political, ecological dimensions of those realities.
Yeah. Yes. Of course, I do see it. I do see the relation. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I mean, of course, we should not confuse technology with the, like the huge dispositive, the huge industrial exploitation of technological research, although nowadays it seems to be so much connected that it's difficult to disconnect. But historically speaking, the effort, the way that technologies, that recording media, recording the technology, recording, fixating communication and delivering communication, it goes back to early centuries, like even like printing was a kind of fixing things and then delivering the information elsewhere, in time and space. So as far as sound is concerned, I would say that sound was the most not by surprise, perhaps, was one of the most fleeting and more difficult domain of experience to Wi-Fi. It came out, let's say, last after photography. So first the word, then the let's say the written word. I mean, first the written word, then the image, let's say, and then finally sound. And of course, the tendency of the industrial exploitation of technological advances is always in order to profit, in order for an income, for a commercial exploitation to be, in order for a market to be established, you need to produce merchandise. And the merchandise means that you have to objectify what you are selling. So this objectification is needed in a marketplace. This is why I say that music, by way of being objectified, became the object of marketing, of a market, became a merchandise. But a music of sound, while initially it is reasonable that even more music of fixed sound, of designed sound, of invented sound, of synthetic sound, of processed sound, or whatever we know from electroacoustic music tradition, music of electroacoustic music is, by definition, is thought as a kind of fixed media experience. Then it is so close to becoming a merchandise, and still it had difficulties in becoming a merchandise, except by mediations of other languages and other circumstances that I don't want to touch in this moment. The emergence of live electronics in the 60s and 70s, experimental music, the emergence of sound art, especially sound installation, live sound installations, are for me significant because it's like manifesting overtly to the world that sound is hardly objectified entirely, fully. In fact, I had an experience with gallerists, art gallerists specializing in sound art. And of course, as art galleries, they have to sell art pieces, and they have hard times in selling art pieces. Even the most stupid or direct, straightforward, simple standard installations or sound objects or whatever can hardly be sold, not in the numbers to establish a true worldwide market. Although it is increasing, but my interest in that area was exactly to see how far I could go by not betraying myself, but not collapsing my own principles, and how far I could go in order for one of my sound installations to be sold. It was not. He was thinking, this sound gallerist in Berlin was hoping, was stressing me also that we should sell it, and he tried to sell it. He went very close to sell it, but he didn't sell it. And there must be some truth behind my stupid personal experience that sound art doesn't seem to be capable of establishing a market. And this should make us musicians and sound artists even more aware of how rare, how rich, how important we are to human knowledge or to human sensibility to be transferred to younger generations.
The capitalists would say that you should change the market model and sell the experience, maybe through Airbnb. You visit the experience, you go to the place, that's the thing that I was talking about, that this reification tendency, and that's a really good point, because for me it links in some way this observation regarding technology as something that's not neutral, that there's no media in I mean, there are media, there are a lot of bit-based media that you can store ones and zeros, but it's not where things are happening in some
Yes,
way.
yes. Yeah, this is a good point you raised, this selling the experience. As far as I understand, I see two ways for new capitalism to sell experiences rather than objects. And one is, of course, virtual reality, virtual things. Okay, that has to do with the technological advances, so advanced that um, they can fool our senses in terms of simulating simulating reality, and convey to the senses that that is reality, that there's no difference between that thing, this virtual and the real reality. And I don't see many in recent times. I don't seem to see that it became true marketing. Maybe for for video games, and in those areas, in certain areas, it can be related to this idea, to this notion. But I don't see such a large market that they can really like to change the model. Except for, they are busy in constructing new niches, new market niches, not new markets in general, more worldwide, or non-specific, let's say. But the second way of selling experiences is making everybody become a music producer, giving to the people software that will anyway make something more or less good, and presuming he or she who started the button is the author or the producer or the composer or the guy who is responsible for the result, which is not the case. Of course, is not responsible. The software designers are responsible. Um, so there's a pattern there, which has to do with the fact that every time there is a mediation, there the market sees a possibility, the capitalist market sees a possibility. No, sorry, whenever there's a mediation between two points in time and space, in experience, then the capitalist sees a potential for a market to emerge. Like, for example, historically speaking, the most renowned example is civil radio broadcast was developed, and at some point also discs had to be programmed and sold, and so you needed someone who would present and select the discs, the records, and present these records to the in the radio broadcast, and that became the technical figure of the DJ, someone who presents the records. But then that mediator became the object of a big market as a kind of creative functionality, not anymore an instrumental kind of mediator, but a creative mediator, because by inventing ways of listening, by inventing lists of records, by inventing ways of commenting on records, by selecting specific records, etc., there was a practice of choosing, of selecting and playing back, which became something to profit on. And nowadays, this is also repeating with the music producer, people who don't know anything about music, but can produce music pretending it's their task, it's their effort, it's their product, it's their realization. Of course, they were responsible for pressing the button, but responsibility there is really a difficult issue to you cannot presume, you cannot pretend you are responsible for the results. That is significant, because this way the market capitalist teaches us not to be responsible. You can have music and make it without responsibilities. You can make graphic art and make it without taking responsibilities, I mean, without developing knowledge, without developing sense abilities. Just the listener becomes someone who has the possibility to press the button and makes and realizes on the fly what he wants to listen to for the next 5 minutes, and then maybe we will change his preferences. I don't know, but anyway, it's quite interesting, this notion of changing the model to selling not objects but experiences, and I see those two domains of labor, I would say, where capitalists have already invested, of course.
We have a comment here on our chat by Rafael Passaglia. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Scipio, and my thanks for the organizers as well. The presented topics reminded me of similar discussions in the field of HIP, historically informed performance. Could these topics also be adapted to the ways of how we perceive and interpret music from the past?
Yeah, of course, I cannot reply because I'm not an expert in historic informed performance, but it is true that in a more general view that both historically informed performance and also, for example, extended techniques with musical instruments, with traditional musical instruments, are technological issues. If you understand technology with some depth, of course, if it's not just to buy the latest gadget and use it. It has to do with the technology and with how technologies, mechanical technologies on one side, and listening technologies, listening practices recorded based on records, on recordings, have changed the way we listen to. So we listen. So yeah, that field has to do with these topics. Although I personally cannot provide any special example or points to the discussion. When I'm asked to write about technologies in recent years, sometimes I put in this notion, this idea that in the history of recent music, in the last century, one of the trends, one of the processes, historical processes that testifies to an attention to the technical levels are to include extended techniques, the knowledge of the instruments, and also, of course, extended instruments. I mean, augmented instruments or diminished instruments too. Not only just extended, not only just improvement or enlargement, empowerment, but also a restriction to the instruments, a restriction to the technologies, which are just as important as augmentations, let's say. So the mechanics of instruments, either historically informed or researched upon by Lackemann or whoever among the youngest generations, are part of the technical transformations of music. Although it's a question of mechanics. Yeah.
All right. So we have. Well, I would have one last question. Rafael said, thank you very much. We have already discussed about this, Agostino, about the modes of interference. You compose the interactions, and there's an opening to the results. You don't compose the results, the sound result itself, but you compose the interaction, the interactions. Sound is the interface or multi-phase, like we already discussed it today, in a multiple way. But in the same way, at the same time, you experiment. There's an experimental issue, so you can implement all these interactions. So how broad, how open, and how do you accept the results? How you turn in acceptable results your experiment when you are trying to implement your system that will offer the interactions so the sound can emerge.
Yeah, well, this is always a work in progress, and also a question of refining systems, or refining thinking, or refining the ability to be open to contingencies, or to the input of performers or other people. Um, I think that I'm quite open, and sometimes I see. I hear sound structures, sound textures emerging out of my works in specific circumstances that I had never experienced before. And I'm very happy to see them emerging, because there was more to the system than I could put into it. That it means that there is a larger potential that I could predict. But sometimes I have also to see or to hear results that I would not
accept.
Not accept, or never thought of, and not really accept, that I have to cope with. So mainly the question there is that I was lacking information, knowledge. I was lacking the competence to avoid the occurrence of the emergence of something that I would not be happy to hear. So on the spot, I would just accept, because it is part of the system. But then I would go back to the system and refine it. So some systems, some pieces, some system dynamics, like the background noise study that Adriano is working on, are solid enough as to provide me with new things, with new emergent situations that I could not predict in terms of what kind of sound textures and gestures, and they rarely give me something that is completely out of place, that it is completely misplaced. But there are some other pieces, including at the beginning, the mode of interference number 2, that I had to cope for years before being rather sure, not really completely sure, but somewhat very sure that would not give me something outside my personal aesthetics, let's say. But again, I don't put aesthetics over the process. If the process gives me something that is out of what I would deem acceptable, it means that I was not able to think about it before. So I should think twice and go back to see what I did do or what I did not do in order to avoid that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Agostino. If we have, yes?
No, it was me. It was me thanking.
Okay. If nobody has any further questions, do we have? So I think we can thank very much to Agostino. It's hard to rotulate, as you said, people call you musicologist, composer, mathematician. I didn't know that. It was new for me.
Many years ago.
But okay, engineer, maybe engineering also, engineering head.
Well, people that would call us engineer would I don't know. It's very tough to see why it should happen, but they would be mistaken, of course.
Hmm.
I'm not capable of much more engineering beside my pieces. Maybe.
Okay. Now, I was just saying that it's difficult to rotulate your work. I think all the issues, all the subjects were really, really very important for us. I am sure that in Musitec we'll go, and in each research group we have individually on this group, we will go further on these discussions. I was surprised that Adriano didn't ask anything. I was thinking that he would give tons of questions, but I'm sure his head is just.
He did already. He asked already tons of.
Yeah, we are talking a lot by email, so.
Okay, that's fine.
It's a specific question now.
So Agostino, muito obrigado. Merci beaucoup.
Obrigado.
Mille grazie.
Grazie.
Really.
Ciao a tutti. Buon lavoro.
And we keep in touch. Keep yourself safe, and let's go. Unfortunately, we are close to 450,000 dead people in Brazil. I'm always repeating this. So thank you, Agostino, and bye-bye.
Ciao. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank
Grazie.
you. Bye bye.